Yes, hello, Meghan Hanley, New York City comedian. In June, it'll be my 23rd year doing stand-up comedy. My bio doesn't reflect that, but yeah, I'm very excited to be here and to just, talk about writing and also hopefully get some writing tips myself.
Hell yeah. And my name is Leclerc Andre. I'm also a New York City comic, and this is my last year doing comedy. So,
The farewell tour.
yeah, absolutely. Signing off.
I got it while the getting was good. All right. So the first question I want to start is both of you recently released albums. And so typically that'll mean, okay, now I'm going to start with a clean slate of jokes. What is the process? How do you approach that when you've done an album? Do you, how much of, obviously you've got to keep some of that going for a while afterwards. You don't just write a whole new set the next day. And yeah, we'll start with that. And then I have a related question.
Okay. I found that, yeah. So right now I'm excited to sort of, I feel like starting my next chapter. Like that part I find very exciting. But yeah, it also can be very overwhelming. Like I know the week that the album came out, I was doing shows, and that Saturday I was going to get on stage and I was like, what do I say to this crowd? I'm like, the album's out. Now who am I? And I'm like, Meghan, this crowd didn't hear your album.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's this combination of, yes, I wanted to use it to push myself to work on what I'm doing now, what I want to talk about now, what's coming next, but also it you still have jokes. You have jokes that you have jokes you're working on. There's jokes that I have on the album that are better now, that I've made better. I've worked on them since the album. There's also jokes that are done, I won't use again. There's jokes that worked just in time for the album and now they're done. Like so it's this combination of things, and I feel like it's very hard, and I feel like it's me trying to be forgiving of myself, because it's very hard to get into sort of a spiral of being like, all right, move on, next thing, next thing, next thing, but also there is going to be a little bit of a grace period in between what you put out and what you're working on next. So what I've been trying to do more of lately is just saying myself, like, what is happening right now, like with you, with your life. Like that album for me especially was a compilation of so many years and so many things that got edited out. And I recorded so many jokes that I wrote during the pandemic that most of them I didn't include on the album, because I feel like the album was sort of a compilation of so many things. And there were some jokes that got rewritten for the pandemic and some jokes that were specific to the pandemic. But I had some that I was kind of like, if this was the album I was putting out and had put out an album already, I would have kept in because it would have been from that period of time. But since it was a compilation, I left it out. But it's also caused me to kind of get in my head and go, you haven't been writing anything new in 2 years. And then I'm like, yes, you did. Like you wrote those jokes. You just didn't include them, but now you can't use them. So that kind of causes a little bit of a thing too. So yeah, I'm just trying to like get focused on what is happening with me right now, and don't even think so much about the time, but think about what's important, what's happening. Maybe it's not even funny yet, but just write that out and then build even just like 1 minute at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, we finished recording our albums around the same time.
Yeah.
And it's tricky once you become like a paid working comic, because you're not doing mics anymore, right? You're not in that scene where you have this safe space to develop and the stakes are always low. So, you have a duty when you get booked on shows now, if you're getting paid to perform. You have to do well. So you can't just throw away all this quality material that you spent so long developing in hopes that, oh, I could just do a bunch of new stuff and still be worth my weight in gold every time I get booked on a show. So you have this like tricky game of like sneaking in the new, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, look, I'm gonna do this killer right now, then I'm gonna try this new bit. And if the new bit works, awesome. Maybe sneak in another new bit. But you always want to like kind of, cushion it between really, really polished material. And before you know it, you start washing your older stuff out, right? And so hopefully after a few weeks, a few months, if a person comes to see you again, it's like, oh, this is a brand new set. Well, it started with like one bit here, one bit here, one bit here, and then you just kind of you have a clean slate. You have this brand new set, and that's been my process. Like I had to keep working on some of the stuff that I recorded on my album because I didn't just want to do a bunch of new stuff. And then that old stuff from the album is just like getting better and better. It's like this creative process never ends.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, you listen back on your album, it's like, oh, that joke is so much better now. I would have just waited or something, but it's like, no, you did the right thing, you recorded it, and still sometimes people will come out because they want to hear those old jokes anyway. So it's all a win. It's never a loss.
Yeah, I think that that's the thing, and I've said this publicly a bunch of times too. Of like, especially in New York, we get so in our heads of like new stuff, and you forget that if someone's coming back to see you, it's because they liked you, and they probably don't mind hearing some of that stuff they remembered.
Yeah,
right. And I think what gets tough is that we get in our head of, I've got to write something new. I got to write something new. And then on top of that, of course, I've had the shows where people have said to me, you got to write something new. And even though that's like the one person, especially when I used to do the gigs out on cruise ships where people were seeing you, there are 15 shows sometimes and you're breaking up your material, but they're gonna, if they keep coming to the show, you're not seeing a brand new show every single show. And I remember at the end, someone's like, oh, Meg, we saw some of those jokes the other night. I better write some new material. And even though in your mind, you're like, this person has no idea what they're talking about. That's what stays with me.
Yep.
You know, I'm like, they're right. It still stings.
Yeah,
it does.
It's painful because like we would hope they would understand the process, but they just don't. You know, we have to be graceful with them. But like I have people who live in New York City who hit me up like almost every weekend, like, hey, I want to check you out. I was like, give me a break. Okay. Let me develop some stuff. Let me watch the news. Let me brainstorm. But like give me a week or two before you watch me do 20-minute sets back to back.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes it's even just more for us because we kind of go, we get in our own heads, especially, you know, if you have friends that are coming to see you that you know have seen you before, we're starting to go, oh, they heard all these. And sometimes we're almost like self-sabotaging in a way that like, who cares? Whatever you want to say, just perform it. Like people pick up on that. If you're just performing and having a killer set, it doesn't matter, you know, and it is fun. Like Leclerc was saying, like, if you can get in the new stuff in the middle of that other stuff, like, even though that might be the only part you're excited about, but if that hits, you're like, whew, all right, got that, check that off. And now let me do this other joke that, again, like I've improved upon. And then let me do an old classic because let me just sit in it for a moment and enjoy.
Yeah, I think that that's true, that if you can sneak the new one in, and especially if it works, it kind of energizes the rest of the set, even if you're pulling a super classic out that you could do in your sleep. It feels cooler to the audience.
For me, it's the best feeling on stage. It's like capturing magic. It's truly the best feeling when you do something that's brand new, it's unproven, and you make it work on stage and it pops on stage. It's like, yeah, this magic is real. I can do this. This is incredible.
Yeah.
And also, like, I noticed that there's this unrealistic set of pressure on comics to like generate new. But like, remember musicians in the 80s and the 90s? Like, they would have roadies who would follow from city to city to hear the same damn show. There's no pressure on them to be like to reinvent the wheel. They're coming because they were a fan of the artist. So we should look at fans of comedy the same way. It's like, if you're really a fan, you should understand the process. And if you come to see me 2 nights in a row, 3 nights in a row, 3 weeks in a row, you should understand there's going to be variations, but is a process to this product that I'm putting out.
I know. I always think about that. The music metaphor is, when you go to a concert, like think about the concerts you've gone to where it is like, hey, this is all new stuff from our upcoming album we haven't even released. And you're like, no, I came here. There's like 3 songs I really wanted to hear. You gotta give me those 3 songs.
I didn't buy that album. I'm not invested into that project yet. Let me hear the hits.
Yes, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So something you both kind of said, but I want to ask explicitly, is a longer set just a lot of short bits that you've put together, or do you have to think about that differently when you're like, okay, this is going to be 35 minutes what am I doing with it?
I feel like that's a really good question. I feel like so far a lot of what I've done is a combination of like the shorter bits coming together and seeing where things fit in. But something I am trying to get a little better at doing, and I was even talking about this with some comics when I was getting ready for the album, I was like, just tell your story, because maybe not everybody's going to get it, but if you're telling your story, people that like your comedy, that relate to you, are gonna come back and hear it and want to hear more of it. And it's hard to do when, I'm someone that like, I don't sell out. I don't have huge fans. A lot of times, even if I'm headlining, people are just coming out to a comedy night. They're not necessarily coming to see me. So that's hard too, because it's this pressure of, you want to show the club you can kill, but you also are trying to like honor what you're trying to develop next. And I think a lot of times, if I have longer things I want to work on, I bail on them sometimes. And I think I have to get better at being like, this is something I find funny. Keep working it out. And you can kind of even let the audience in on, especially in a long set, because you have so much time, being like, this is something new I'm working on. Even if you don't tell them upfront or you tell them midway through, they kind of like to be in on that experience of it. And that's just something I think I have to get better at. And I, even though I have some longer bits, I have this like long thing I want to try out, but I need the time to do it. I can't like fully do it at a club. And it's basically like this letter I found that I wrote in high school to like a friend of mine in college. And it's just, I found it during the pandemic, and it's so ridiculous. Like, 'cause it's just like the words of a high school kid. And like, I just want to break it down and add jokes in between to being like, who would like write it? But I'm like, I've put it off for like a year and a half because I know I need the time to do it. And I'm like, enough, like write it out and just start trying this. If you have the time, have a longer set. If they already trust you, who cares? Like, go for it. And that's just something I know I have to work on more, because I do definitely piece things together. And I think I do focus so much on, unfortunately, wanting their approval. And wanting to crush, that I have to take more chances and more risks about like, what is it that I really want to say and build from. So it's definitely still a work in progress.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand as a comic is like the type of comic you are. So if you're a one-liner, your process is just gonna be longer, right? Because every joke that you write stands alone. Where if you're a storyteller, the key is to find a good story, and usually that's a much better starting place from a time standpoint, right? Because stories can be as long as you want them to be, but if you have a story, you just have to figure out how to tell it and refine it. So I know that like when I'm approaching new material, for me, I pull comedy from everywhere. If it's a story, if it's a bit, if it's the news, I try to pull comedy anywhere I can find something that's funny. But I try to lead with a little bit of faith. And I mean by faith in the audience, I try to like curry some faith, some confidence in the audience first. And once they're like, "Oh, this guy's funny," then I'm like, "Well, let's remember that. Remember you liked me a second ago, right? Yeah, you like me? All right, here comes the bullshit." And then you serve them, that undercooked food, and hopefully you get some good feedback and you make adjustments. But I think it really, really starts with like finding some currency with the audience. And then with that, you can like really, really trust them with your process. I know for me, when I'm trying to write topical stuff, I can write topical. I can like search for topical material for like 3 hours and come out with maybe 40 seconds of like usable material. Whereas when I'm like searching for an experience or a story to write from, it can take a lot longer.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, that idea of like letting the audience in on the journey, like kind of being like, hey, we're about, you trust me now, we're gonna go somewhere. You want to come with me?
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely so much of it. And I think there's a lot of that happens anyway, like subtly or not so subtly. Like, I think the audience picks up on so many things that they don't even realize. And we also get in our own heads in a way that I feel like there is a lot of like doubt or sabotage that can go on in our own head, that they're all with you, like from
Mhm.
listening back to sets or watching back a set. And I go, oh, I felt that way about that set. And I go, all right, what was the wording here? And I should just kept going with that, or they didn't abandon me. I abandoned the joke. They didn't abandon me. Like I bailed.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I think
that's
it's
why, yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
go
think they
ahead. Yeah,
do
yeah.
pick up on, I think we don't realize how much they can pick up on that nervous anxiety or your
Yeah.
own lack of faith in something versus your confidence. Like I've seen certain people that just like, again, they might be doing some half-baked stuff, but they're coming out there with not this like overconfident look, but just like they give you the feeling of like, hey, everything's going to be okay. I'm in control. I got this down. Don't worry. This is going somewhere eventually. And the
Yeah.
audience, but the audience gives them so much more because they are coming in kind of like you said, not self-sabotaging. They are coming in with the attitude of like, this is all going to be great. We're all in this together.
Yeah. I found it so helpful, like when I've done Costa's like new joke night. It's just fun to be sitting on the sidelines with other comics going like, are we really doing this? This is like a live audience and we're trying out new stuff and it's exciting. It like takes you back to like the roots of it. And it's fun to watch the other comics do it. And then if I can, I usually try and stay and watch him. And I've gone by on nights I'm not even booked because I'm like the comfortability that he has to sit on stage for 45 minutes to an hour with sometimes a notebook and the way he works the crowd, but just lets them know, like they know it's going to be new, but he like brings them to him in such a way that it just becomes its own experience. And I was like, oh, that's just a really cool thing to see. And like, keep in mind that if people are coming to see you and they're having a great time, they want to be on board with wherever you're going to take them. And it's hard to keep that in mind when you're sometimes going, what is the next word?
Yeah. It's so funny too, the difference between your subjective experience on stage and the objective. I mean, it's also subjective, but being someone who is at the back of the room watching it happen. Same thing. You can even be on the show and you're like, oh, look at what Costa's doing. That's going so well. I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? It's like, why?
Yeah.
You can do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. So thinking back to when you were newer and building up a set when you didn't have beautiful A material to fall back on, what was there kind of the same question, was it just a matter of building it up bit by bit as it did? Were there certain like lengths of sets that felt like either an achievement or kind of like a nerve-wracking thing, like, okay, yeah, I can do 15, but oh no, a feature set, how am I going to do that, kind of a thing?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's part of me that looks back and goes, gosh, I wish I just had that like blind confidence that I had when I was like starting out and wasn't good, but just to start asking for like, I should be on that show. I should be on that show. Oh, you need a feature? I'm done with hosting. I'm ready to feature. And like, I'd be doing 20, 25 minutes on these shows. And I'm like, with what jokes? What was I doing? Like, and it's just like one of those things where you got to a point, you're like, I'm ready for that next level. And then I feel like for years, I always just felt like I was editing that set. And I felt like for years, I'd be like, I only have 20 minutes, like for years, like I'd be moving something. And then it was always because we were always filtering stuff out because the stuff wasn't great. So it wasn't like, oh, this is a good one I'm going to hold on to. For a while, I was just always sort of writing on top and filtering out, writing on top, filtering out. And then, yeah, it was kind of scary to take that next step to like really featuring and being like, I know I can do 30. I know you can put me in a room with a crowd that's with me that I can do 30. And, I kind of try to figure out, can I take that leap to headline? And then headlining is like the funnest, I feel like, where I thought it'd be so scary and so much pressure, but I feel like there's like a release even in the audience of knowing like we've made it to the headliner. And it's fun and it's relaxing. Whereas as featuring, I love, but featuring feels like hit, 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 hit. And it's great, but you like want to kill. Whereas headlining, you're like, all right, we've got 45 minutes. Like, let's create something here in this room.
I know for me, when I first started like transitioning from like that 25-minute to the 50-minute slots, I found, I don't know if you've experienced this before, but like I've never been aware of performance stamina before. Like
yeah.
when you're doing 5-minute spots and 10-minute spots, it's like you're just like yelling something out the window. It's nothing. It's a breeze. But
Yeah.
then you're like on stage for 30 minutes, the lights are hitting you, you did an act out, you're like, am I doing a hit class? This is like
Yeah. Yeah.
getting exhausting. And you're like,
Right.
and you can't show the audience that you're like, not it's not so much fatigue, it's just that like for every joke you have to show up. You just have to keep
Yeah.
showing up. Because if your delivery starts getting like, if you start half-assing your delivery and you're like half-assing your act outs or half-acting your voices, it's like, come on, bro. What are we doing?
Yeah.
You gotta perform. And you're not aware of that when you're just doing like 15 or 20-minute
Mhm.
spots. You just, oh yeah, I'm just working out, you know what I mean? It's a breeze, it's a blink, but that difference between 25 minutes to an hour, I became so hyper aware of that the first time I started doing colleges. I was like, oh my Lord, you guys want me to dance for every song, like every song you guys want me to show up. And that for me was like the most eye-opening experience when I started like doing longer and longer sets. I'm like, man, I have to start dressing appropriately for the stage. I got to wear a t-shirt now. I can't just wear layers like an asshole. Like I got to wear. I remember the first time I was like featuring for a really high energy headliner, and I noticed he would bring wardrobe to every show. And I'm like, why are you bringing he had several shirts. I'm like, what's going on? And then I saw his first act and I was like, oh, he's going to need to shower and change clothes after every show because he's sweating so hard and working so vigorously on stage.
Mhm.
And that was like a real eye opener. It's like, yeah, when you feature, you can breeze through that. But that headlining spot, that 50 minutes, that 60 minutes is sometimes it can be real work.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's so much work, and it is about, especially when you first start doing it, figuring out the pacing of it. Because I know when I first started doing it, you're going, do I have enough material to fill this time? Even though I know I have enough for 45, you go, I have enough for 45 if the room's with me. I have enough for 40. And then you start going like, it's a totally different ballgame, because what you have for 45 with a hot crowd is a different 45 with a crowd that's acting up, a crowd that's not paying attention, a crowd that's quiet. I mean, next thing you know, they're not talking to you. You're going through material. And it is you do have to figure out the pacing of it. And I know I would take comfort in if I look over at my phone, I'd be around 35 minutes and I'd know where I'm at. And I'd totally just go, oh, you have so much stuff left that you can go to. But initially getting to that, like, especially because I've had sets where you do 30 minutes and you go, I just went through every joke I have. How did this happen?
Yeah, stand-up is like the quantum realm, right? It's like time moves differently depending on if it's a good audience or a bad audience, right?
Yes.
You can do 10 minutes of material in 3 minutes if the audience is shit. Whereas
so true.
If you're rolling, if the crowd is with it, if you're like, doing a little bit of crowd work here and there, you could do like 20 minutes of material in an hour. And it's like, man, I didn't even get to my good jokes yet. This is crazy. Where did time go? It's truly such a distortion of time. It's like the quantum realm, really. It really is.
It really is.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And so that's why the feeling of like knowing you have more than enough material when you're headlining, it's such a different change. And then you start to know the pacing of it, because you go, whatever this ends up being, I've got this. But initially it's scary where you're like, I guess I better do that newer one I was working out around 30 minutes, because I gotta stall till I get to the killer end bit. I definitely had that a couple of years ago where I was like, I guess I will do my J-Lo and A-Rod new joke about them cutting out sugar. It's new. It'll be fine. It's topical, but it'll go on for about a minute and a half here while I figure out how I can fill the rest of this time.
There's always two feelings when you get the light. It's like, already? Or it's like, oh, finally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was dying up here.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I've had that happen the opposite too. The same thing, like in both experiences, where one, I just kind of do a glance and go, okay, really? And then I've had the opposite where I'm like, oh, just nobody kept track of time. Like I'm pretty much done.
Yeah.
Because usually you're supposed to get a light, but I've had times where, especially people don't remember or something like that. So I am usually timing it, but I go, oh, well, that's a relief. Like I didn't get a light, so I thought I had another 15. Like there's like 5 minutes left to this.
And when you're rolling, when you get the light, when you're rolling, it's like it sometimes it pisses you off. It's like, don't take away my joy. This is like the best part of my day.
Yes, totally.
Yeah,
And I've also had that where at some places like, they'll say like, usually it's like 45 to 50. You kind of like give that range of things. And I kind of will be like around, like I'm getting close to 50. And I go, and I really am having this internal battle of being like, this is going, do I just keep going or like, do I end it? No matter which I do, I feel like I get in a little in my head either way. Cause either it's like, I kept going, it ended great. But I'm like, was that disrespectful? Did I go like 3 over? And then other times I'm like, this is such a big laugh. I'm getting off stage and I'm like, he should have done the other.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. It never ends.
So how much do
ever
you
get the light and then have somebody go after you, just eat it? It's like, you lit me for this?
Yeah.
You lit me for this nonsense.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Or sometimes,
give me an encore.
Or sometimes like if you're even going like, all right, I get it's tight show, I got to keep it moving, and you get the light, you get off stage, and then sometimes the MC goes up and just does a bunch of random stuff in between, and you go, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I was just destroying. I was overly respectful, and I knew like we had to do this on time, but like no, you're doing like like, and sometimes I get it where sometimes there might be something where they said like, do a little in between or something might happen, but sometimes that's not the case and you're like, oh no, I see what happened. This person saw me killing and decided they'd take their shot unannounced without instruction.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, come on.
It's so interesting though too, like on a showcase show like that, where you can sometimes tell either the audience loves the host or they loved that one comedian and it doesn't matter how well anyone else does. They're just like, we want that Leclerc guy back. We're not going to be nice to any of the rest of you because you're not Leclerc.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I've had to follow that too, which has been tough. Like I the feeling of having sometimes like a room full of 200 people, like not be with you from the second you get on stage is brutal. And you go, well, in one sense, I didn't say really anything yet. So they can't like I haven't done anything. So they haven't like, but right off the bat, they're like, no, we wanted to leave with the last and that's tough. That's a tough, like you got to kind of sit in it for a little bit. And I've absolutely rushed that many times. And
where's the light? Is the light coming? Hurry up, light.
Yeah.
To your point, when you said something like when the host does material after you crushed, like sometimes that'll make me upset, but other times it's like you should take it as a compliment because I think they're trying to bring the room back down.
Yeah.
Because you just really tore that shit up, right? It's it's like the opposite of like when a comic bombs, how the host has to bring the room back up. Sometimes people kill so hard that you have to like say, all right, guys, I'm the host. I'm just here to reel you back in a little bit, lower your expectations, and then give this next comic a fair shot. So anytime I see a comic do material after me, after I know I did a good set, it's usually one of those two things. It's like, oh, they probably had a bad host set. Sometimes that happens a lot too.
Yes.
Like the host start the show, they'll eat a little bit of dick and like, all right, I'll be back. Okay.
I think that's the time where it bothers me because sometimes, especially because I host a lot, I totally get it where you go like, all right, this crowd's so up in a whirlwind, I gotta just kind of level it out a little bit. But yes, it's when I know the person's just doing it selfishly to get their own ego back, that's where I'm like, I know what you're doing, and that's nothing to do with the show, and that's why I don't like it.
But Leclerc, I do like that's a very positive glass half full way to look at it. Be like, this is actually a compliment.
Yeah, I try to, take that approach because if you don't, then you can look at the behavior of comics like every comic is an asshole. It's like, well, maybe not.
Turns out most people are pretty cool.
I like that. I'm gonna go with this approach from now on. I'm gonna go, oh, that's
I killed so hard they got a reset.
Oh yeah. Hit that button.
So in terms of, you're saying, sometimes you get to 35 and you're like, oh, I haven't gotten to this yet or whatever. How much now do you plan out a headline set, or how much is just kind of feeling along as you go? what is this crowd into? Where are they at? What do you need to give them to get them where you need them?
I feel like for my headlining sets, I do like to kind of write it all out, but I have it kind of split up into pieces. So I know I have like these groups all go together. Then it's like, that's my next chunk. That's my next chunk. That's what I'm doing sort of around the end. And that's kind of like the bring it home. But within that, there's so much room for things to happen and things to play along. I feel like that's more for me, kind of if we kind of get off track, which usually ends up happening at some point. I go, all right, that's the next set of jokes you're going into. And it depends. Do I have to like hit them hard with this next set of jokes because we're like rebounding from something? Or is it, again, just for me to go, you got 15 minutes left. Let's just like fire it in. But I do need to really I like having that all written out, and especially does help if I am trying to put newer things in to have them like associated with the other bits, like where they'll fit. So I don't forget them, but also so they don't just like randomly end up somewhere else, because sometimes I had that happen recently where I have like a newer few jokes that I'm doing and I went, oh, let me just throw these in here, but they didn't fit there. And then they kind of bombed and I was like, oh, the newer joke. And I'm like, no, you didn't give it a chance. You didn't set it up. It wasn't where it should be. And then as a standalone, it just kind of was strange. And then the next like set I had, I moved it and then it went great. I'm like, yeah, it's not the joke sometimes. It's just where you're kind of placing it.
Yeah, I know that when I do longer sets, like if I'm doing an hour, this is gonna sound excessive, but I could spend like 6 hours and up working on an hour set, like preparing for an hour set. And that's when I'm like on the road. I think it's like when you're on the road, you kind of have this freedom of like checking into the hotel and then like, getting kicking your shoes off and like doing a little bit of prepping. And that like sometimes I could sit down and say, let me just do an hour of prep before the show. And that hour can turn into 4 hours or 5 hours. And I think one thing that you said that is like so valuable is writing everything out. Like seeing all of your material really, really helps you place things, and it also helps you structure your set. Well, for me, I try to use callbacks whenever I can, and one thing that helps me with callbacks, if I have a really strong joke and I can work in a callback, seeing all of my jokes in front of me really helps me tie those things together. So I think for me, that's like always been one of my favorite tools when structuring a long set or a big set is writing it all out. And that doesn't mean like transcribing. I just mean like, hey, this joke's about whores or this joke's about dating, and then like kind of getting everything in front of you, like just like the kind of crux of the jokes in front of you, and then from there you can say, oh, this would work as a closer. I should put in the beginning. I should follow this chunk up with this chunk about jobs or whatever. And having those things all in front of you really, really helps get get you a good firm grasp on what your set's going to be. And another thing that I also do, which is the worst, but I'll work tirelessly on a set, and as soon as I get on stage, I'll do like my last joke first. Do you ever do that?
Yeah. Or just something happens and you go, oh, whoops.
Yeah, you just
And you go, well,
yeah, you'll spend the whole day writing out a set, and then you're like, all right, I'm gonna start with this joke, and then X, Y, Z, right? And then you get on stage, and you just start in the middle of your set, and it's like, why do I do this to myself?
yeah. Oh yeah, I do. And that happens all the time. Or like one thing will randomly come up somewhere else, and all of a sudden it's like, as it's happening, it all looks seamless on stage. But now I'm like, okay.
Yeah, now you're doing that.
Yeah, you're like, you picked that. Yeah, you are doing that. It's true. I'm like, you moved that joke. That's with the family stuff. You just did it in the middle of like the dating stuff. Where are you going to next?
Yeah, you're lost. You know what happens a lot? Like sometimes I'll like have a joke about me being tall, and I'm like, oh, I'll do that here in the set. And as soon as I get on stage, somebody yell out, "You're tall!" I'm like, golly.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, I guess I'm going into my tall material.
Right. Which I mean is great because again, you're just feeling out the room and seeing what happens. But no, totally. Like I like to write out what I've been trying to do is like, if I have a long set, I like to really, again, like write everything out. There is absolutely like the value, I feel like, in seeing the words and seeing like that set come out and how it can get moved around and stuff. Something I've tried to do is I will do, if I have a long set, like hours before the show, because when I get closer to the show, I can't have the same focus to do it. So I like to have it actually written out ahead of time. So when I'm closer to the show, I really am like going through it like bullet points, and I don't have to overthink, because I have a tendency too, when I'm writing out a long set, even if it's a 20-minute set, when I start doing the first 5 things, my mind starts wandering about other things that the joke could be. And I'm like, stop. This is just supposed to be this is not supposed to be the writing session. This is supposed to be the I'm writing the set list, which can be fine if you have the time. It's great to do it. But like when you're getting close to the show, you're like, I need to really see where all this lines up. Like, yes, see where other things can go, but like, let's focus and get this down.
Yeah. I am so glad that you said that, because I thought I was the only person with that type of ADD. But I will like, as soon as my notebook comes out, like if my assignment is to like work on my set for the show, like prep for a set, all of a sudden now I'm like getting all these ideas. I'm getting creative. It's like, oh, this will be a good tag. It's like, this is not the work that we're supposed to be doing right now.
Yes.
And the opposite will happen too. Like I'll sit down, like, let me come up with some jokes, and nothing will come to me. It's like, oh, maybe you should move that over here and move that over there. So it's so weird how little control that I have in those spaces of what I'm supposed to be doing with comedy. When I have my book out and I'm like, oh, just structure, Dre. That's your only job, just structure. And it's like, oh, this would be really funny if you just wrote this. And I'm like, oh,
Yep. No, I find that it can be like such a struggle, but I've also found that as like, sometimes as like a writing tool, what I've done is I've sat down and just said, like, just write out every joke you have. And then what usually happens, of course, I never get to that, but I have added some tags from doing that, or added a line, or like, or I have had a joke and it's like online dating thing. And then one day I was sitting like just making a list of names, and I was like, oh, Matthew. And like that turned into like a whole bit about like that name. But if I had like sat and just made myself just start writing, because I was like, I have no ideas, I have no new thoughts, and I was like, just write out every joke you like, just write out a set list. And then that caused my but yeah, when you need it to focus, it can be very difficult.
You gotta like reverse psychologize yourself.
Yeah. What I started doing is that I should do this again. I had one notebook that had every single joke written out in order, highlighted, and I try to make sure that one was with me. So I'm like, all right, if your brain starts doing this, or you start going off a 10, you just start looking at this. You have it written out already. Just start looking at it.
I was gonna say about the notebook thing. I have like too many notebooks. But what I started to do is like getting different size notebooks, and that really helps. Like I'll get like the big composition notebooks, the full size ones. Like I'll use those to write new jokes. Like exactly. I'll use those to write and really transcribe jokes. And then I'll have like these short, like these really tiny notebooks. Like that you flip vertically. Oh yeah. And with those, I'll just write like set lists. Like so instead of like using that to write new jokes, I'll just like write like my set list on those, and I can like put that in my pocket. I can bring it on stage. It's like a really, really good tool that helps me like focus. Like, hey, this is the time. I got the right book for this. This is not for new jokes. Do not write new jokes in this book. This is just for your set list.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm going to start doing that immediately, because I can't tell you how much paper I waste on the big notebooks with half-written set lists, because I'll even be in the green room and I start to go, all right. And then I go, well, we'll just see where the set takes me, or something like that. And it's like, now there's just so many half set lists on my full notebooks. And then it just becomes a mess. That I like that. I'm going to start using it. Thank you.
They come in packs of 3. Get them. They're the best.
Oh,
I love them.
Nice.
Well, that's okay. So that kind of answers the question I was just about to ask, which is, do you do all that organization in your notebook? Do you have separate notebooks? Do you ever use note cards or apps on your phone or anything like that? I mean, you've kind of already answered, but is there anything along that you would want to add about, I guess, the technology of organizing your sets and jokes?
I do like to write everything out by hand, especially set lists, but I have over the past couple years writing wise started using the computer more. Even just as like a temp, like I to help ideas sort of flow initially, I kind of done that, but I still end up writing a lot of stuff out by hand, or even just writing specific phrases out, especially when I know it's something new, like I'll have the set and then I start writing the words a couple times over and over. But I have really just started doing like Word docs. I feel like, yeah, just in the past couple of years, and especially lately, I have a file that's just new jokes. And it's become like a stream of, even when I don't feel like writing, even if I can set aside like 20 minutes, like I did this yesterday, I was at the airport and I was at the airport bar and I opened it up and I was like, you don't have to write anything. Just reread this stuff that you wrote. And some of it I forgot I wrote. And some of it I just added a little to at the end kind of thing, where it's just like a stream of conscious that I can kind of keep going through. But I do a little bit of like everything, but I don't use the notes on my phone too much. It's mostly like either just the Word doc or writing stuff by hand.
Yeah, I used to be the same way. I used to never use the notes on my phone. I would just try to keep everything in the books just to keep things in one place. But one thing that I found an issue that I would have is a joke would come to me like in a random place. And I wouldn't have my book with me. So I would start using my notes to write down jokes if I didn't have my book with me. And I found that for me, it's more valuable to capture all of my jokes instead of running the risk of forgetting and never, capturing that magic versus like trying to keep everything in one place. So, and because of that, I have jokes everywhere, like on my laptop, on my phone, in all my books.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. But at least if I want to find something, I know where to look, I guess.
Yeah.
That's saving grace.
Yeah, it didn't get lost somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the biggest crime in comedy, when you have like a great joke that leaves you, just like,
yes. Yes.
Okay.
But it's so like I feel like I like, that's why I like talking to comics about what their process is, because I'm always hearing different people with different ideas. And I'm always like, okay, that can help jumpstart something or do something. I was saying Phil Hanley was on like Jared's podcast a couple months ago, not talking about comedy, but he was just saying, oh, a lot of times my way of writing is I like to kind of be on the move and I have a dry erase board and I just write down the ideas. And I'm like, why am I not doing that? I'm like, that is how my brain works more. My brain works more when I'm like moving, got a lot of thoughts happening, but I get so sort of caught up in it. Sometimes I'm not writing enough of it down. And then sometimes those thoughts come back and they don't. And it's like, yes, I have to be more diligent. Just write it all down. Who cares if it doesn't work in the end? Fine, but at least you're not losing something.
Yeah, it's I think it's the most important thing is to get it down. However you get it down, guys, with whoever's listening, like make sure get it down some way. If it's a voice note, do that. If it's a notepad, if it's your phone, but as long as you get it down, that's the most important thing. It's such a crime. I know that happens to every comic where it's like, oh, I had this great idea, I don't know what happened to it, but I'll jump out the shower to write down a joke. I don't give a damn. Like,
ooh, that is dedication.
Yeah. Yeah. Good ideas are, far and few. They're hard to come by, and sometimes those ideas are shit. But at least you tried them, right?
Note to self:
so
get
true.
Leclerc one of those shower pens for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Then you can just write it on the wall and keep going.
Yeah.
I've also found that lately there's been like some ideas that I've had that I had like the idea once, and then I've been beating myself over not going back to it. And then there's part of me that goes, yeah, maybe it just doesn't work. In my mind, I'm like, I'm holding it over this idea that like sit and write that joke out. And I'm like, if you have to tell yourself so many times to sit, like maybe it's just not, maybe let go of it because you're getting in the way of writing something else. Like either just do it right now or just let go of it. And that's hard. It's hard to do. It's all hard.
It's really hard, but
It is
I think
all hard.
every joke deserves a chance. Like at least try it out. I always felt
all
like when
right.
jokes keep circling back to me, like, and this happens a
Yeah.
lot. Like I'll have an idea and I'm like, nah, and it'll circle back, it'll circle back, it'll circle back. I kind of take it as a sign, like, hey, give it a shot, you asshole. This is what you do. like try the joke. Just try it. If it doesn't work, at least you can say you tried. But there's a lot of jokes that I have that I've written down like twice in a year, and it's like, why does this joke keep coming back? It's like, oh, because I never tried it. I never actually tried to put work into it. So I try to look at it that way. That's a fun exercise.
All right. I'll force myself to write this joke about Abercrombie and Fitch.
Wait, we've talked about this. This joke has been haunting you.
It's been Abercrombie and Fitch has been haunting me, and I keep trying to find a way to make it funny. And then the other day was like, what if I put like all my rage into politics, but like make it about Abercrombie and Fitch? But I'm like, that'll just take a lot of work. This is a work in progress. My Abercrombie outrage.
Well, in the quantum realm, it's time to give everybody the light. This has been delightful. It's gone by too quickly. Do you guys have any parting thoughts about, writing and building up your set that we didn't get around to?
Oh, I have one. So this is a question I get a lot when younger comics ask me about like set lists and how to grow them. Like if you're within your first, 1 to even 4 years of doing comedy, like please have a strong 5 minutes. It's like such good currency in comedy, having a good 5 minutes. Your hour is gonna come eventually, 25 minutes, all that stuff is gonna come. But there's a lot of comics that I know personally who've been doing comedy for like 1 or 2 years, and they're like doing longer sets. Like I'm talking 25 minutes to an hour. They're doing these sets, but they don't have like a tight five. And I feel like it's the best example of putting the cart ahead of the horse. So like try to build your sets in like 5 minute intervals. If you can come up with a really tight 5 minutes, you can use that to audition for JFL. You can use that to submit for a late night set. There's so many applications for a good 5 minute set. So if you're listening and you're doing these mics and you're trying to develop your 25 or however much time you're trying to develop, take a look in the mirror and make sure you have a tight five, because those little tapes go a long way in getting you into festivals and getting you seen by other comics who book shows. Have a good tape that's 5 minutes and make sure you can have something to market yourself. It's the best currency in comedy is having a good 5 minute tape. So, before you build your 15-minute set, start with little 5 minute intervals, like a couple of 5 minute sets. I think that'll really serve you if you're coming up and you want to be seen by people.
Very good
I like
advice.
that. That's great advice.
Yeah.
I would say just the advice I have is be forgiving to yourself. Because
Oh yeah.
I can't tell you the amount of times, and even though I'm saying it, it's still a work in progress for myself as well, that I get in my head of I'm not writing enough. I'm not doing enough. And it's like, you know what? That's fine. But unless you're going to sit down and write right now, you're just wasting your own energy being negative to yourself. So, okay, if you have that feeling like I'm not writing enough, set a timer for 20 minutes, even 10 minutes, set a short timer. And you'd be amazed at how much you can write in 20 minutes, or how much you can get out. And if it even doesn't end up being comedy, who cares? Just write what happened. Greg Warren gave me great advice years ago. And he goes, at the end of every week, I just like to write, or even every day, what happened today that was interesting? Because something interesting happened to you today. And from that might come a great joke. It might not. But like, what happened that was interesting? Because you start doing that every day. By the end of the week, you're going to go, oh, there might have been a lot of things,
here.
A couple jokes in here. And I just thought that was good advice, because we're always thinking, but what's funny? What's funny? And it's like, well, but what happened that was interesting? And then the other stuff could come from there. So
yeah, that's really
also very good advice. Excellent. Well, thank you both for sharing your processes and your knowledge and your really good advice and your time. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
I'm at the Meghan Hanley, Meghan with an H, at the Meghan Hanley, all socials, all everything.
Yeah, and I'm at Leclerc Andre on Instagram. None of my stuff is uniform. It's terrible. So
bad Leclerc.
I am a mess. I don't know that, but I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna start by writing new handles. So
that is your next writing assignment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both very, very much.